Greetings, everyone. I'm Jeff Carter. I go by he, him with Seattle CityClub. Welcome to this webinar on the elected officials' response to the housing and homelessness crisis, part of the Civic Boot Camp on housing instability. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that Seattle CityClub is a small nonprofit with a big mission to strengthen our community through conversations with community leaders on critical topics like this one and encourage civic engagement. So please consider supporting us to continue programs like these by making a donation on our website, seattlecityclub.org. I would like to welcome our panelists and jump into the questions. So far, we have Representative Tai, with Washington State Representative Tai, thank you, with the 41st District. Girmay, Zahilay, King County Council member. Thanks for joining us, Girmay. And at some point, Casey Sixkiller, Deputy Mayor, will be joining us in a minute, hopefully. So over the past couple weeks, we've heard at our Civic Boot Camp webinars, we've heard from housing and homelessness service providers and advocates about the complexity of the crises we're facing and the need for more affordable housing and services for people experiencing homelessness. So today I'd like to focus on the steps you're taking at the city, county, and state level to change the narrative, hopefully, and shift towards solutions. So I'd like to start with kind of a general overview, if we can. So what are your top priorities and strategy? Let's start with Representative Tai at the state level.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Seattle Club, for hosting these civic conversations. And I'm so grateful to participate in these conversations and listening and hearing from the leaders in the communities and community members who are passionate about this particular topic. So to your question, what would be our top priority when it's come to addressing housings as a whole and homelessness as part of the complex issue we're facing? As you've seen, one of the P's that we have been pushing for multiple sessions already is the conversations about good cause. If I have to really put the underlying strategy and thinking process, is number one, we want to make sure people are housed, because it is part of the well-being, not only the physical well-being of an individual, but definitely the mental well-being of an individual. We understand enough about trauma induced when people are facing traumas and not being sheltered, not being housed, is one of the big keys. There's no way an individual would be able to have the capacity to, one, heal, but more importantly, making decisions that would be beneficial for the individuals themselves. And so to us, the underlying issue is to ensure that, to provide the environment where people can thrive and people have the capacity to make good decisions for themselves. And that is to house people. And the good cause policies is to us is a fair way of looking at things, that we want to make sure people are not being evicted simply by bias. We all carry some sort of bias with us, but the worst of them all, and we have seen playing out more blatantly in the recent years and recent time, is racial bias. And we have seen, based on data, number one, which community are being impacted the most in Washington State, and number two, how those multi-generational trauma impact them as far as getting housing and being housed. And so good cause is definitely our top priority. The thing about this session is that it happened in the environment of the pandemic. And I would be remiss not to mention it because then it shifts our priority and it shifts our conversations in a way that is become more urgent as being housed or being homed is a public health crisis. And the criminalizations of homelessness has become more and more of the topic of conversations. And as you introduced me, Jeff, I'm the representative from the 41st Legislative District. And one of the cities in my own district just voted for an ordinance or piece of policy that we known would criminalize people who are unhoused. And that is another topic, a priority at the state level. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Girmay, why don't we go to the county level and just kind of briefly overall your top, we'll get into the details later, but your kind of top priorities and initiatives.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's Girmay, by the way.
Girmay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. I'm Girmay, King County Councilmember. Really great to be here. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to connect with you all. I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of you just as much as I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that we're working on. So a few of the ideas that we're working on are really around building more housing, using the resources that we already have more efficiently, like empty hotels and motels, keeping people housed through legislation like Just Cause, providing rental assistance. And I know some of you may know about the Regional Homelessness Authority that has recently been stood up and is in process. I'm not a part of that organization, but it is an entity in King County. I'm looking forward to talking a lot more about all of these initiatives with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Sixkiller, I think you've joined us.
I am here, Jeff. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you give us a brief overview of kind of your top priorities and strategies for the city regarding housing and homelessness?
Sure. Well, first, let me just say thank you for including me in this afternoon's program. And sorry I was a couple minutes late. You know, technology is always a wonderful thing when it works. So when it doesn't, it's a little frustrating. But I would say at the city level, you know, we're continuing to be focused, number one, on our ongoing COVID-19 response, which, you know, includes both keeping folks housed, right? So whether that's rental assistance and other services that we've been able to bring online over the last year to support folks in community and staying in their home throughout the pandemic has been priority number one. Part and parcel to that, specifically with regards to homelessness, has been, you know, bringing online both additional temporary and also permanent opportunities for folks to come inside to address our ongoing homelessness crisis that we all have seen throughout the city and our communities. In fact, yesterday I got to participate in one of our newest hotel-based shelter units, the King's Inn, which we opened in partnership with the Chief Seattle Club. Just as an aside on that, you know, we have the doors opened on Monday. When I was there yesterday, they were up to 40 of Native relatives that have been able to come inside, and they suspect that will be a completely full hotel shelter-based property by the end of the day today. So again, we've been really focused on ongoing COVID-19 response, keeping folks in their home, making sure we're not having people evicted right now, providing opportunity, you know, providing additional services to them, and then specifically on the homelessness side is both creating pathways for folks to come inside, get them connected to services, and on the pathway to permanent housing. And I'm happy to talk more as we go here about some of the things we've been doing on the permanent housing side that are both, I think, bridges to, you know, our 600 new permanent supportive housing units that are coming online in the city throughout the year, a lot of it in the Q3 and Q4. And then other strategies that we're advancing in our conversations with both the county and the state right now. So kind of leave it there and let folks unpack it from there.
There's a quick question already. How many residents can be housed at the new King's Inn shelter?
Depending on the configuration, how folks come in, up to, I want to say it's 82, more or less. And then that, that comes on the heels of our Executive Pacific Hotel that opened 2 weeks ago.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And before we kind of get into the policies, and I'd like to go to a little personal level, if you don't mind. I'm curious how your lived experience, and I know each of you has your own unique lived experience, contributes to how your decision making on, especially on these issues. So, Representative Tai, if you don't mind talking about that.
I don't mind. So because you say it, you frame it as this is a personal thing. I have to say that once you are elected, there's nothing about you is personal anymore. It's pretty much public. So as many of you know, or not, I'm currently the first and still the only refugee elected to serve in the Washington State Legislature. And being a refugee, and I continue to push the conversations around having a clear understanding the status of a refugee versus the status of an immigrant. And it has nothing in terms of like what we need to support our immigrants as they coming and feeling a sense of belonging. But there's a significant difference of being a refugee. For me, for a long time, when I first came to Seattle, actually, we landed in SeaTac Airport some years ago, 1983. As a refugee, I knew in my heart that to go back to my homeland, Vietnam, was very limited. So now there's certain political change that opportunity opened. And I say that because even up to today, even serving as a state representative, deep down the sense of being homeless is real. When an individual have no roots, and every single time when I'm in a public space and elected official would say, "Oh, I'm a native Washingtonian for this many years," I will constantly be that one voice that say, "I'm not native. I don't know anybody. I have no network. I'm starting to build roots for my family." And so for me, how that impacts my perceptions when it's come to housing and making sure that it's not simply that people being housed, it's not simply that people have a bed to lay their back down every night to rest so that they can wake up the next morning facing their reality. It's more importantly is to ensure that people find their home, a place that they feel belong, a place that they can grow, and a place that they can thrive. And so that is my personal experience that would lead into the basis value of how I approach these policies.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Zahilay, can you address that question as well?
Yeah, for sure, Jeff. Thank you. Like Rep. Tai, I'm also the son of refugees. In the 1980s, my parents fled civil war in Ethiopia and crossed the border into Sudan, where I was born. And when I was 3 years old, we boarded a plane and flew across the Atlantic, came to Seattle when I was 3, and grew up in South Seattle in places like Rainier Vista, New Holly, low-income public housing. And every year I saw my mom working harder and harder to survive in this city, in this region. And every year I saw how much harder it was becoming. The American dream is supposed to tell you that the harder you work, the easier your life will become. And eventually you'll be able to buy a house and afford a car, and your kids will have better opportunities. But that's not what happened. She worked to the point where she became disabled because she worked so hard as a nursing assistant. And that is a very labor-intensive physical job. And that's the story that I've seen around our region. Thousands of people who are working harder every year, but the world around them is becoming way too expensive just to afford basic things like rent, opportunities for their kids, a safe environment to live in. And so what that taught me is that it's not necessarily blaming individual people and their choices that's the predominant job of our government. Our job is to address the systems, the policies that are broken and not working for our low-wage workers, our low-income people, because it's not an accident that people like my mom continually work harder and get less out of it. It's not an accident that so many people in the Central District in South Seattle have been pushed out of their homes, and the racial disparities that come with it, that people are being pushed out, that our homeless population is growing every year while the wealthy become wealthier in our region. These things are not accidents. It's by design, and we have to address that design to make it more equitable and safe for all of our communities.
Thank you. Thank you. Deputy Mayor Sixkiller, can you also address that, your lived experience and how that's contributed to your decision-making?
Well, for those that don't know me, you know, my name is Casey Sixkiller. I'm Deputy Mayor of the City of Seattle. But at a more personal level, I'm also an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation, the largest tribe in the United States. I have 3 young children. And I grew up in Seattle. But, you know, my family's history, right, if we go way, way back, you know, my family is a survivor of the Trail of Tears, the forced removal of our people from the Southeast to what was then Indian Territory. And my, you know, I could go on and on and on about the history of just my own tribe and its interactions with, you know, foreign powers. Our first treaty was with Britain in the 1600s. And so we've been at this game of resistance for a long time. But I just mentioned that, one, because I think it's important to know about me, but 2, because, you know, along the way, right, we've had to consistently remake our community and have it be a place that can thrive again. And literally, when we were moved from the Southeast to Indian Territory, reconstitute our government, you know, build our institutions of higher learning, do all of these things. And then in the 1950s, there was a policy called Indian relocation, federal policy, where another 50% of our tribe moved. And it was, the whole purpose of that policy was to, was to relocate and basically, you know, begin to dismantle the reservation system across the United States. The promise of a job and a house, move to California, move to Texas, and more importantly, leave the reservation. It was a failed policy. It was overseen by the same individual that oversaw Japanese internment. So it should tell you a little bit about what the actual thrust of the objective was. But as a result of that, our people really fanned out all over the United States. And so we've got a large urban Indian, you know, Cherokee population in the Bay Area, Houston, and a few other places, including the Seattle area in Washington State. But that policy, combined with all the other things that have gone on in Indian country over the last, you know, 200 plus years, has created immense intergenerational trauma. And that, you know, bears itself both in mental and behavioral health, and very difficult challenges for our people and our families, that we work every day to combat and try to heal from. And, you know, look, that's what we see. It's not limited to Indian country, but that is my personal experience, and having had family members and friends who've couch surfed. I remember years ago being in Washington, D.C. when I was worked for Cherokee Nation in our D.C. office, and going to HUD and talking about homelessness and the way in which they counted homelessness. And they always had really crazy numbers for Indian country, because they weren't counting, you know, the one house that had 3 families living in it as homeless. You know, and the feds, right, the name of the game, right, is those numbers are important. Those are the numbers that drive money back into the community. And so, you know, we worked really hard to get that changed. But the same is true today outside of Indian country, right? I mean, we often think of homelessness as just an issue of what we see on the street, but everyone, I'm sure, on this call knows someone who's been a couch surfer. Everyone knows someone on this call that, on this call know someone who's, you know, a paycheck away, if that, from becoming homeless themselves. So anyway, I offer that as a personal background, and I'll just say from a professional background, you know, I've been in public policy now for 20 plus years, and you know, it's been interesting to work both at the federal level, the county level, and now with the city. And really, you know, to echo much of what the other panelists have already said, but, you know, and with respect to housing in particular, the affordability gap, you know, what it actually costs to live in Seattle, to enter the market in Seattle. You know, we're now a majority renter city for the first time in our history. You know, and you know, Girmay said it great. I mean, there are a lot of reasons for that. You know, it's not just because people don't want a mortgage. It's because they can't afford a mortgage, or they can't, you know, there's a whole, or they can't afford a home. And so we have an affordability issue, but we also have policy issues that have contributed to that over the years, right? Redlining, everyone here knows what redlining is, but, you know, the long tail of redlining still exists today. And it's something that I worked on at King County, just in how we provide transit to South Seattle and South County. Still goes back to those redlining days. And so, you know, you've got affordability, you've got just public policy. In the city of Seattle, right, we're an hourglass. And so land use policy, you know, where we have single family zoning versus multifamily contributes. And then lastly, I would just say on homelessness itself, on visible homelessness, unsheltered homelessness. You know, having worked on this for quite some time, and you know, this past year, if it has taught us nothing, it has certainly fleshed out in the open just how disjointed and disconnected all of our systems are at every level of government to address what is a crisis, not just in the city, but across the United States, especially on the West Coast. So I'll stop there, Jeff. And
thank you. That's a good lead into my next question for Representative Tai. What have we learned from past efforts and the pandemic that are informing what you're doing now, and making policy and legislative initiatives to address the issue?
Thank you for the question, and I think I'm going to take exactly all the words that that Casey have been sharing. What have we learned? I think up and down our policy bodies, that is cities, counties, state agencies. We have learned that, and I'm going to step even a little back. I'm not sure if that is a new learning. I think we knew this all along. We just don't want to acknowledge it. So to frame it as a new learning, as how we can move forward. But what I think we can move forward is because it became so blatant that people cannot hide it anymore, is the very basis formulary of how we allocate funding. The formulary of how we allocate funding is to separate, to create this silo that, and worse yet, to create a competition between those agencies that the goal is support local community and their citizens, ended up competing with one another for resources that are needed to get the job done. And let's go back to that very racist system, the system that created in order to get to an outcome. And that outcome is that those who are being marginalized for a reason continue to be marginalized for that same reason. And the data repeatedly show it to us, but the will of the community, the will of the people, and the veil that being covered is being completely lifted due to the pandemic. And my sincere hope is that this would give us the will to make the significant change. So yeah, I hesitate to say this is our new learning. We knew this all along. We just chose not to do anything about it.
Thank you. Councilmember Zahilay, can you talk about some of your specific actions that you're taking? I know know that there's a Just Cause initiative being proposed, and I know you've worked in Skyway on affordable housing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So right now we are working on a Just Cause proposal, which would require, if a tenant is going to be evicted, that there is a justified cause for it. And hopefully that, along with the other provisions in this legislation, will provide more continuity of housing and get us to the point where we appreciate the fact that the most effective and efficient way to stop homelessness is to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. And so that's really the idea behind Just Cause eviction, especially in a pandemic, especially during a recession. We're also working, actually last year we passed a new sales tax called Health Through Housing, which will provide hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue in the next several years for us to buy empty hotels and motels and provide housing in that way. Again, using the resources we already have more efficiently, especially in a time when hotels and motels have been struggling and occupancy is down. Let's use these moments to buy up distressed assets and use them as effectively as possible to provide housing for our most chronically unhoused populations. You mentioned Skyway, Jeff. Skyway is an unincorporated community in my district, and it's home to 70% people of color, the highest proportion of African Americans in the state of Washington, and really the next place where we should really be afraid of gentrification and displacement happening. If you look in other parts of my district, the Central District, parts of South Seattle like Columbia City, even Rainier Beach, those are places that we often talk about in the past tense. We wish we would have acted faster to maintain the communities that already live there. And now those communities have been pushed out into South King County. But Skyway, gentrification is happening right now. So this is really urgent, but it hasn't happened all the way. So the goal is to make this the model, the blueprint in our state for how to invest without displacing the communities that already live there. So we're getting money for affordable housing. We're getting funds for tiny house village. We're getting funds for a community center. We've gotten funds to dramatically expand public transportation in that area, all at the same time while we're addressing the land use and zoning in that area to make sure that the people who live there now can stick around long enough to appreciate those benefits. My office is also working on a land and building ordinance, which basically says that all around our region, we have empty plots of land and we have underutilized publicly owned buildings. Let's identify what those are and create a surplus process where we can transfer those spaces to community organizations for the public good, for things like housing and facilities. I think that's going to be a really good use of the resources that we already have. So I'm happy to talk more about all of these. We also have rental assistance that's coming in by the millions from the federal government, and we're partnering up with BIPOC-led organizations to administer those funds as quickly as possible to the people who need it most.
Councilmember, a quick follow-up, if you don't mind. There's a question from Ted. What is the cost of housing someone in a hotel room compared to the cost of housing someone in a tiny home village? Both provide privacy and a sense of security. Is a hotel room considered to be a goal more so than a tiny home village? If so, why?
That's a good question, Ted. I don't know the answer to that, of the actual dollar difference between those two. I do think all of them are needed. We need the full continuum of housing options to address the crisis that we're in. I think for hotels and motels, those are buildings that are already built, already set up and ready to go to provide housing, running water, et cetera, for people. And just the basic dignity of privacy, being able to close your door and not hear lots of noise and be afraid of what's right outside your door. So I think hotels and motels are a really big option. I also think tiny house villages are a really good option because of how cheap they can be constructed and how nimble they are. You know, you can set them up and take them down as needed. So I think both are necessary.
Thank you. Just in case people don't know, I did an interview with Low Income Housing Institute on tiny home villages. So go to the resource page and you'll see that interview. Deputy Mayor, there's a question from Whitney. Yesterday in the news, a new Seattle charter amendment called Compassionate Seattle was announced by a group that proposes redirecting city government funds to address immediate needs around creating more housing to support people unhoused and address related issues impacting those with and without shelter. If you're aware of this, would you please share your perspective and what we need to know to make informed decisions related to this specific proposal?
You know, Jeff, that's a great question. I am here in my official capacity, and I am prohibited from speaking on that we're not allowed to speak on potential charter amendments or political things like that. We got advised by ethics yesterday. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that question, but I can answer the shelter cost question, at least with respect to the city of Seattle. So, you know, the typical tiny home village, if you will, costs about $600,000 for us to set up. And then the average cost per room or per bed unit is just over $16,000 a year. Currently, the King's Inn, which I mentioned earlier, that we opened this week, is running at $62,500 per unit, or per bed, pardon me. And remember that captures services as well. You know, I think in the Executive Pacific is around just over $55,000 a year. So pretty big cost differential. You know, a lot of that's just is the cost per room per night, you know, just that room rack rate. That is what it is. And we've been able to negotiate a pretty significantly lower rate. But I think, you know, but that at the same time, you know, while we are on the path to delivering our 3 new tiny home villages here, hopefully by the end of the second quarter, we have identified a 4th site, but siting these are not easy. To be very honest, they're not easy. Unfortunately, you know, there had been legislation in the state legislature to exempt tiny home village units from SEPA, which would have made a huge difference for us just in terms of the ability, once we find a site, to bring it online faster. Unfortunately, that did not make it past cutoff this year. But so there's a big differential, and I you know, but I also think it's important to also keep in mind you know, there's the cost to stand these things up, there's the cost to bring folks inside, but what we don't want to have happen is not have places for people to transition to. You know, what the goal, right, is to get people into permanent housing, right, and try to permanently disrupt their experience with homelessness. And so, you know, that tether is important, you know, and you know, while we are continuing, and you know, Girmay mentioned it, right, we're obviously working with the county too on their health through housing program to sort of figure out, you know, what is the right mix of shelter and the types of shelter and the types of services that are available, and what are the capacity of our providers to actually do those things. That's a real challenge as well. Anyway, so we're working through that. And then, you know, I just would say too, you know, Jeff, you interviewed Lehigh. I don't know if you did that recently, but yeah, you know, we just opened the Clay Apartments 2 weeks ago. There's a really good example of, you know, we do have some properties, some developments that are coming online now, or are slated to come online, you know, between now and the end of the year. That given the market conditions, you know, maybe don't need to be market rate and are available for us to purchase and stand up as immediate permanent supportive housing. So, you know, we're trying, you know, those create pathways for folks to come out of shelter. You know, we don't want folks to be in shelter forever, but right now, folks who are coming in tiny home villages, their average stay is 360 days. Yeah. That is nearly double what it was pre-pandemic. So we've got some issues there. We're working through that, but we have to have places to move to.
A quick follow-up from Teresa. She would like to know the number of spaces approximately in new shelters coming online, so she can tell her community. If you happen
I
to know
think
that.
with the 2 hotel units and then the 3, I should say we have a 3rd hotel that we have identified. We haven't landed it yet, and the operator yet, but not including that, we're probably on a path to 400 minimum.
Mm-hmm.
And
she
that
also
doesn't,
asked-
that doesn't include the PS, permanent housing aspect. That's just pure shelter.
She also asked, what's the approximate cost of emergency intervention services we are currently doing versus what it would cost to provide secure, supportive housing / shelter?
I'm not
You
sure that
happen to know that?
I'm not sure I totally understand
Yeah.
that question.
Okay.
I would tell you our shelter, except for basic shelter, which, we've been moving away from for quite some time, is, each of our shelter operations has some form of wraparound services that is a part of it. And I think one of our questions with this new federal money that's coming down under the most recent package passed by DC is, what are the things that we can be doing to provide additional money to our operators so they can expand the suite of services that are available in the various properties that they operate. So that's exciting. That's something that the operators are very interested in doing, and trying to see if we can, continuing to, add additional behavioral mental health services in particular.
Great, thank you.
I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Representative Tai, it looks like there's 2 questions from David, and I'll kind of put them together in terms of why is it hard for West Coast blue cities to just pay rent directly instead of using billions of federal dollars Section 8 homebuyer program directly using, okay. And then the other kind of related is why not just pay directly to landlords and tenants versus CBDs? This adds time and cost to the process. So I guess the question is like, how are we using federal dollars, and how are we supporting tenants and landlords in this process?
Yes, thank you for the question. I read it as we come along, and it's sort of like been in my mind and trying to figure out how to best answer that question. I think part of it is kind of like linked to what I have answered the previous questions, is that we set up a system where these agencies are intricately linked to one another with a particular, a specific purpose. And then what I also learned as now I'm in this space is that there is the power structure that is sacred, and I'm saying it not to dispute it. I'm saying it with a clear understanding how the system is created, is that we have state government, and then in the local government, we have county and we have cities. And each of those level, the individual who in the positions are being elected by the community members. And their sole job is to really understand their community needs and where the needs are most being impacted through engaging with their community member. So when the Fed coming down to the state, the way it funded is also interesting, because a sum of money goes straight to large county, which King County being one of them, and some of the money goes straight to large cities, with Seattle would be the others. However, at state level, we know that not all counties and cities and towns across the state would have the same needs, nor the structure needed to put the funding into the hands of those who need them, nor the data that could tell us who are the people being impacted and need these funding that would go direct to them. Because of those reasons, we couldn't possibly say, hey, Mr. Jones, if you are a tenant and you are behind paying your rent this many months, let us know, we send you the check, and we're done. I mean, that would be a completely different system, but that's, I mean, part of it is really the state really wanted to make sure that we protect the data privacy of individuals, like you privately, however you privately taking care of yourself. The state is not in any business of knowing that either. And so that's why we create all these different systems, still hopefully with the intent to get the help to where the needs are most relevant and urgent. I hope I answered that question, because I don't like that answer either.
I'm happy to respond for King County too.
Thank you.
For King County, the answer is both. There are significant funds that go directly to landlords, and there are significant funds that go through community-based organizations. And you want to make sure the latter is part of your strategy, because you have to reach populations that have low access to government. You don't just want to help the people who have close relationships with their elected officials who can call up and say, hey, I'm a landlord, I want money. You want to work with the organizations that are very trusted in populations that have very limited access to government, that are maybe are marginalized or low income, or just aren't the people who are going to get up and say, hey, let me call Girmay today, he's my council member, but are still the ones who are very much in need. So you rely on community-based organizations as trusted conduits. And then you also should provide money directly through landlords as well, because like you said, that's an efficient process too.
Girmay, I just want to follow up. David asked, and I might have gotten his question incorrect, but he said, my question was referring to why isn't there direct payments to landlords, not tenants? And why is there an over or underutilization of the Section 8 homebuyers programs versus rentals?
I don't know which specific program David is talking about, but through the King County program, there is direct payment to landlords.
Okay. Okay. David, just let me know in the chat if you have a follow-up question. So Deputy Mayor, I know that you're working with Andrew Lewis and to create more tiny home villages. I know there's actually a private partner, what I've read, Omni, also getting involved. Can you talk about like the public-private partnerships that are working together on these?
Yeah, so, Councilmember Lewis announced It Takes a Village initiative, maybe it was like a month and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer now. Time goes together. And they, he really has taken the lead on organizing potential community partners and investors, if you will, that are going to raise money. Lehigh is the operator that they're working with on that, and the idea behind that is recognizing that we've got as I mentioned before, the $600,000 to stand up a village. If we could figure out how to leverage a public-private partnership here that both helps to offset some of the upfront costs, we could potentially leverage some of the other money the council's already put aside, and maybe that is a path for us to add a fourth village or a fifth village with the $2.1 or $2.3 million they appropriated for this program for the expansion of the program in 2021. I think one of the things we're still trying to figure out is it's great to have money to cover the upfront costs. It is the ongoing services costs that is the bigger number that we have to try to figure out solutions for. But I think it's great. I think I think Andrew told me he's raised about $2 million so far. That initiative has, and so we're working with them now to figure out how we slice and dice it and see if we can put it to work.
Thank you. Let's see. Representative Tai, there's another question from Miranda. I work with a lot of people who are experiencing chronic homelessness. Why are there not more programs attached to those receiving assistance to help them with services and life skills?
I think my offer, Miranda, is let's have a deeper conversations outside of this space and then come back to this space and share what the, here's the thing, it's so important that So like when I work on, it's totally not housing, this is about tax. When I work in tax as far as revenue for the state, a lot of our people in the public eye see people being taxed. It's like government does not stop taxing people, and the local government keep asking for levies. Nobody talk about exemption. No, like, so in the space of housings, right? We talk a lot about other things, but we don't seem to find the peripheral of how we look at housing as a whole. So I think Miranda questions get into the human services area that would help sustain and support those who have received assistance, continue to lift them up and get them to the place where they would be in permanent housings and more of a thriving individual and community. And so that is my thinking space. And I think it's require a lot more than a 2 minutes answer, because there are a lot of programs, whether they get out to the organizations that provide the help to these community or not, is the questions at hand.
Thank you. Girmay, there was a question. You referred to the Regional Homelessness Authority earlier on, and I'm wondering, I know it's still in formation, but I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how this new thing, this new entity could be successful where other attempts in the past, like One Table and other efforts, have kind of struggled to succeed. So do you have any thoughts on that, and will you be a part of that?
Thank you, Jeff. I do think it's a necessary step that our region is taking just to find efficiencies and better communication across all of the different providers. I wasn't around in the year that it was voted on and proposed, and I'm not on the leadership committee. I'm not very involved, so I'll refrain from speaking too much on it. But to answer your question about how do we, make a more successful attempt to end homelessness in our region, whereas past attempts have failed, the answer is we're just not making the level of public investment we need in housing, period. And King County is never going to be the government entity that solves homelessness because of the restrictions on our ability to raise progressive revenue. We're always stuck in that dilemma of, do we raise sales taxes and property taxes to solve these big structural problems? And the answer is always difficult, because we might be harming the very people that we want to help by raising sales taxes and property taxes. As many of you are familiar with, McKinsey came out with that report a couple of years ago where they said we need at least $1 billion of public investment in housing every single year just to keep up with the demand for housing. And we're not anywhere near that. And King County can't be the one to do that, because are we going to raise $1 billion a year on sales tax, diminishing the buying power of the very people we're trying to help? Are we going to raise $1 billion a year by increasing property taxes and putting our senior citizens who are on fixed incomes in jeopardy of becoming homeless? These are the kinds of things that we have to grapple with at the King County level. So we really need our state, our federal government, our cities who are able to raise progressive revenue to step up and give us the amount of funds we need to build the housing we need, to repurpose the existing buildings we have, to provide the permanent and supportive shelter that's needed to provide housing for our region. Until we do that, all we're going to be doing is treating symptoms rather than root causes. And that's not going to get the job done.
And I'd like to follow that a little bit, Jeff. And I thank you for that answer, Girmay. It's at the very beginning when you asked the questions, right? And the piece about how all of these issues are really interconnected, and what being spoke to is how do we look at revenue at the state level. The regressive revenue, the regressive tax structure at the state level will not would not help us getting out of the situation. It doesn't matter how many initiatives we're gonna try. And the idea of charitable, the idea of people who come together and contribute once a year to something that is not massively make a dent into the problem we're facing at hand is, number one, not sustainable. And number two is not addressing county that is not as big and as welcoming and as, in another word, as blue as King County or as Seattle City. And so when we know that housing issues is across the state, when we know that homelessness is across the state, and so the state would fail if the state can't get to a place where we can really restructure our upside down tax system.
Representative Tai, David says this is where programs like the Section 8 homeowners program comes in. What is being done on Build Back Better federal funding to meet this need? Can you address that question?
I will get back to you, David, because I am not familiar with Section 8 homeowner program. And so I would need to dig a little deeper to really answer you with facts.
Deputy Mayor?
So I was hoping to,
Turn on your video.
Can everyone see me?
There you go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My brother from another mother, Casey number 2 over there, told me that he could hear too much humming when I was talking. So is it better now?
It's fine. No, it's fine.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Hey, I was going to kind of comment on 2 things. Number one is on the Regional Homelessness Authority, and this was a huge priority of Mayor Durkin. We are very excited that the first CEO has been selected, Mark Dones. And, that was a very long process. We originally had intended to transition to the new authority at the beginning of the year. Obviously, with the delay in the hiring of the CEO, again, complicated by COVID, we're now much further behind on that. But this is a huge moment for our region. And it's no small task. It is not a job that I would want, to be honest. It is really going to be very difficult just to try to work through all the different layers of government and others. But it is the right thing to do. And look, the proof is in our numbers. In 2020, the city of Seattle spent $170 million on our homelessness response, $100 million more than we did 3 years prior. 40% of everyone we served in the city of Seattle in 2020 came from was last housed in some place other than Seattle. South County being big, and then out of state actually, but mostly South County. There's a reason for that, right? Seattle is where a lot of these service providers are. It is where, a lot of these shelter assets are. It's a lot, Girmay is pushing and pulling to try to create other opportunities in Skyway and other parts of the county. But it is going to take, a regional approach and a shared vision for both how we, coordinate and collaborate, and stretch these dollars. I mean, we're throwing a lot. That's just the city of Seattle, King County. Between the county and the city, we probably spent well over $300 million last year on homelessness. Okay, so it's clear that there is more to do. There is plenty of work left for us to do, but there is, I think, a real call to action for a way for us to do that in a much more coordinated and organized way. And we're excited for Mark and to see what he can do. And he's got some big, questions that he's going to have to, really rally folks around, let's learn from our experience from the past year about what's working, what we've continued to not work. And I think that's exciting, but it'll be a little bumpy, but it's the right thing for us to do. On the Section 8 question, it's a great question. And it's something that we, the city, are spending quite a bit of time thinking about. The mayor actually is meeting with Secretary of HUD Fudge today We've been in quite a bit of conversations with the White House and others the last several weeks, trying to think about ways that we can reshape, remold the federal commitment and participation in both homelessness and housing, especially now that we have a new partner that's a little more open to those kinds of conversations in our urban cores than before. But it's very exciting, and I think the Section 8 tenant-based vouchers, as well as other things that we, again, what's exciting as a policy nerd is, there's a piece for the feds, there's a piece for the state, there's a piece for the county, and there's a piece for the city, and we can have a much more holistic view that is centered on that individual or that family. And that is possible. It just takes us all being focused on the same thing and trying to solve for the same thing. So, but I want to let you know that was a great question, and it's something we're working through right now.
Thank you. Thank you. I know we just have a minute left, so I'll give you each a chance to say, how can people work with you? You're elected representatives and officials. How can people work with you to shift towards these solutions that we've been talking about? So Representative Tai.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I was just texting Casey. I have a minute left, literally, because I have a floor vote to go to pretty much right now. I'm being nudged on the other end of my phone. So really quickly, my door is open. The best way, honestly, is to work together during the interim. During session is absolutely insane. Really a lot of good ideas that is not being cooked, that's not being supported, that is not gone through the community engagement, will simply die. It doesn't matter how good that idea is. It needs community support, and that's what I love about our government, or the direction that our government is working towards. This government gotten worked for the people, and in order to work for the people, people's voice gonna be in that space. And so for that, I humbly ask that you pester me if you need to, because for one crazy reason or another, I don't respond to you as promptly as possible. Like bug me. Don't ever think that that you annoy me by any shape or form. But let's work together during the interim, because you know the needs of the community that you serve more than any politician like myself know. So I am the vehicle to make sure that your work is successful, because in the end, it's about the outcome for each and every community members that we are serving. And with that, I apologize, I have to drop off. Very nice to meet many of you on this Zoom space, and I hope to continue engaging with you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you very much. Councilmember Zahilay.
Thank you all so much again for this awesome conversation. If anybody ever wants to reach out and collaborate, I'm putting my email address in the chat here. And in terms of what we all can do better, I think one thing that we can all do better is direct our advocacy power toward the real solutions, the real things that are underlying the major problems that we're seeing in our region, and not exclusively focusing on symptoms of those underlying issues. So, as a council member, I get lots of people reaching out to me about things like encampments and property crimes and things like that. And of course you should reach out based on those things. We all deserve to live safe lives. I'm not telling people to not do that. I'm saying for every time you reach out about those symptoms, to also reach out about the root causes and use your voice to lobby our state government and our federal government and the people who are in true decision-making authority for us to have a more progressive tax, for more progressive tax options, for us to share prosperity broadly, because right now we're heading toward a very scary situation where the people who are already wealthy and powerful are going to become more wealthy and more powerful, and the people who are struggling and working to make ends meet can barely even afford to live in the home that they've called home for a long time. So that's all my ask is today, and I'm here to collaborate with any of you who want that vision of shared prosperity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor.
Well, one, I think, having conversations like this is part of the solution. right? And becoming informed and educated and involved and sort of seeing what makes sense to you and finding organizations then that to get where you can channel that energy and commitment. I mean, Alison Eisinger's here. I'm sure she has a list of 75 different groups that you all could, that she could pair you up with, and you all could be your own advocates for these issues. So that's number one. I just think that's super important. There's no shortage of frustration right now, of fear. But I also think that there's an opportunity here for hope. I have to just tell you that I went and toured Lumen Field last weekend, where we have our mass vaccination site up and running. When we are at full capacity, we will do 20,000 vaccinations a day. The look on people's faces as they were in line and through at the back was unbelievable to me. Just this weight lifted off of them. The ability to go see family again, the ability to feel whatever, to not have that, not be so scared. And I do think that, thinking about the future also means we have great opportunity with it. The question is what we do with it. And I agree very much with the sentiment that we don't want to just treat symptoms. I also believe, though, that these are the moments where we need to come together as a community and really, determine what do we want the future to be, and then reach out and grab it, and not let it just sort of happen upon us, but be very intentional about what it can be, and use it as an opportunity for us to address the inequities that we see all around us. And now we have a moment where we can do that. And I feel really fortunate. The city of Seattle, right? We've been on the forefront of so many things. We don't always get them right, but there's no shortage of trying here in terms of whether it's different types of revenue sources or different approaches to CJ intervention, or even housing and homelessness, and participatory budgeting and other things that bring us decision making closer to the community in which is being impacted or affected. And so I would encourage you, going back to number one, is stay involved. And continue to support forums like this, where we can share ideas, ask questions. I think one of the hardest things I find in my job is I don't have enough time in the day to respond to everybody. I don't have time to return every single phone call. Alison knows that better than anybody. But doesn't mean that I don't want to talk. It doesn't mean I don't want to tell what we're doing. It doesn't mean we don't want feedback. So anyway, with that, it's really nice to spend this time with you all, and appreciate your support and interest in this. Thanks,
Well,
Jeff.
thank you so much, Deputy Mayor and Councilmember Zahilay, for joining us today.